Howdy guys, how to change the fuel filter on your 97 and 98 Dodge Ram with the 12 valve Cummins. Slightly newer Dodge Ram with the 24 Cummins will have the same fuel filter assembly, but the bleeding procedure will be slightly different because they have a different injector pump and an electric lift pump. While older 94 through 96 12 valve Cummins will have the same bleeding procedure, but the fuel filter design is slightly different. These 97 through 98s have what's called a cartridge filter, where you take the canister off, take the old cartridge out, put the new cartridge in, and put the canister back on. Where the older design had a spin-on filter, just like your oil filter, you just unspin the whole deal, throw it away, and put a new one in its place. First things first, we need to locate the fuel filter. As you can see, it's right here behind the injector pump, kind of tucked away where you can have a hard time seeing it if you don't know where it is. Once we locate the fuel filter, we want to make sure we have the correct filter that can go in it. Sometimes people can swap out the 97 through 98 canister filter with a spin-on, so you now need the older 94 through 96 fuel filter instead of this cartridge. As you can see, we've got the larger top base with the aluminum canister below it, so we know that this is indeed one that uses a cartridge filter. Once we're sure we have everything we need, the first step will be to disconnect the water in fuel sensor. That way, once we remove the canister, we're not still connected by a wire. Just pop that clip off and pull him out. Now, before we take this thing apart, we're going to want to drain the fuel out of it. To do that, we're going to want to make sure we have a catch pan underneath there so we don't make a big mess. Once we got the catch can in place, we're just going to hit this yellow lever to drain the fuel out of the fuel filter. This will allow the fuel to drain into our little catch can and empty the filter, making it easier to remove. Once we're done, we can go ahead and close that valve again. Now that the filter is ready to come off, we're just going to use our 9/16" socket with a swivel and a couple extensions to get at that nut. While they aren't necessary, the extra swivel and extension does make things a little easier. We're just going to loosen this guy off about a turn, break him loose, that way we won't have any problems in the future. Now we're going to put our hand underneath the filter so that way when it drops down, we can catch it. Now we're just going to loosen off that nut while holding the fuel filter canister with our other hand. Now the fuel filter canister should just fall down and we just have to snake it out. So now we're just going to remove the fuel cartridge. We're going to let that guy drain a little bit just so it doesn't make a mess all over the place. Put him on our newspaper. Now inside the canister there is still a small amount of diesel, so we're just going to pour that into our drain pan. So now we're just going to take our new filter cartridge out of the packaging, being careful to be very clean with it as you know, it's a fuel filter. Inside there should be 3 O-rings, a small O-ring, a large square cut O-ring that goes on the outside, and then a medium-sized O-ring that sits on the outlet. We're going to put the fuel filter to the side here and replace the O-ring on this inner stud. He just comes right out with the helpful hand of a pick. Put the old O-ring to the side, take the new O-ring, and just put him over top. It's a good idea to wipe a little diesel over him for easy installation later. Now we just take the filter and set him in. He's going to go over and top that O-ring without much fuss, and he sits right in place like so. Now this assembly is ready to get reinstalled in the truck. However, because we have to snake that guy in there so bad, we're just going to take a small cloth and put it over top of the filter, as well as a rubber band to help keep the junk out. Now we're just going to snake that fuel filter in the same way it came out. This isn't necessarily an easy job, but you know, a couple thousands of people have done this before us, so we know it can be done. So I'll just snake him down in there, like that. Now that we got the fuel filter in the general proximity, we're going to go ahead and remove that rag. Now, if the fuel filter had been off for a while, or putting in a new canister or something like that, so the top base wasn't soaked with diesel, we'd want to put a little oil or diesel on those O-rings. But because we know that this thing had just had diesel in it, there should be plenty of oil or diesel on the top bit, so this shouldn't be a problem. Now when you go to put the canister back in, there's only one way he will sit, with those tabs right there by the yellow lever in a notch on the canister top plate. So make sure that it's in there. You can hear how it's in that notch, and everything will go together fine. If you do not have those notches lined and try to tighten up that fuel filter nut, well, things may not go so well. Now we're just going to take our 9/16 inch socket again and go ahead and tighten that nut back up. We're just doing this by hand. It shouldn't take much pressure. There you can see we got this guy hand tight, and the stud is about level with the top of the nut. That's a sign that we are all lined up, the notches are all in there good. If you're having to go more than hand tight and the nut is barely started or something, well, you know that that's going to be an issue and that you have something not aligned correctly. Now we're just going to take our ratchet again and give that guy a good snugging down. Nothing crazy. Remember, it's sealing on O-rings and not steel to steel. There we go. Just a nice snug down, and there you have it. New fuel filter is installed. Now, last but not least, we're going to reconnect that water and fuel sensor. And if you've disconnected any other plugs, such as this FSS plug, you're going to want to make sure that you've got it connected again. Otherwise, this thing will never start. Now, when it comes to bleeding this thing, you could just go crazy trying to pump that primer until you get all the air out. But my preferred method is just to go in the truck, start it up, hold it at 1500, and hope for the best. A lot of the times, it'll just purge the air out on its own without much hassle. Now, in the case that didn't work, what you can do is grab yourself a 14mm wrench and open up the stud on the top of the overflow valve. Now, if your overflow valve is not stock or it doesn't have this stud on the top, well, then what you can do is just open up the bleed bolt on the top of the fuel filter. It achieves the same thing, but the advantage of this is that by doing it this way, all that extra fuel and extra air just gets put back into the tank instead of making a mess all over. Then just pump that primer like it stole something from you. A good 50 to 100 pumps should be plenty. Once you get that done, go ahead and tighten up that stud on the overflow valve and maybe give the primer just maybe 10 more pumps just for good measure. With the engine running, it's always a good idea to check for leaks, make sure nothing is leaking, you didn't leave that yellow valve on or anything like that. It really is just as simple as that. So thank you for watching and keep wrenching.